Welcome to Washington in Focus Daily. It is Thursday, April 16th, 2026. I'm Carlene Johnson, and we welcome you to the show today. Bit of sunshine after yesterday's crazy weather. There was snow. Did you get some of that? Super windy. Lots of power lines down. So come on, spring. We're banking on that soon. In today's episode, we're really all about income taxes all the time. And while progressives are touting the wonderful things to come for those who stand to benefit from the tax on millionaires and other small businesses, opponents are discounting many of those arguments. So I'm going to share my interview with the Economic Opportunity Institute, a Seattle based progressive group that really championed this income tax from day one, and their latest campaign in convincing people of the benefits of taxing the wealthy and redistributing the wealth to the less fortunate. There's pushback, though, from lead Republican Representative Travis Couture, who on the Republican House side is the lead budget writer. So he has some very passionate pushback to some of the things that are coming out from the Economic Opportunity Institute. And then my conversation this morning and a chance to meet with the owner of a Kent trucking business, Spirit Transport Systems, Kurt Nuccitelli, the owner of one of these trucking companies, who's become a private plaintiff in the lawsuit against the income tax, which was filed last week in Klickitat County Superior Court. This is the one that is led by Citizen Action Defense Fund. You've got former Attorney General Rob McKenna and former State Supreme Court Justice Phil Talmadge, a Democrat, that have joined in as sort of the legal spearheads on this campaign against the income tax. But this gentleman from this trucking company in Kent is, again, one of the three private plaintiffs that have joined onto this lawsuit. So I had an opportunity to tour that business today and find out why he's willing to really put himself out there. And I can't wait to share some of that interview with you. So let's dive in. Now, one of the groups that has lobbied hard for passage of Senate Bill 6346, the millionaires tax, if you will, which supporters call it as, opponents say it's an income tax that they believe will eventually be an income tax on all levels of income earned in the state. Um, they're touting the benefits, this group is, of those who will get the redistribution of wealth. There are a lot of working families tax credit extensions. There's some benefit in business and occupation tax breaks for some levels of small business. There's some sales tax exemptions for hygiene products, deodorant, diapers, some of those types of things, where some folks do stand to gain from the income tax if it ends up being implemented. Now, Annie Kuklik is policy and research advisor for the Economic Opportunity Institute, or EOI, as I'll refer to them for savage of time. They're a Seattle based think tank that has lobbied quite a bit for progressive revenue options and certainly was behind the income tax from day one as it moved through the legislative session in Olympia this year. And I got a chance to speak with her late on Wednesday, and she told me that the new income tax on millionaires, from their perspective, is really about correcting Washington's regressive tax code.
Washington has the second most regressive tax code. I'm sure that you've heard this many times. This means that the poorest amongst us are paying the highest percentage of their income towards taxes. Regressive really just has to do with that like downward trend. So yeah, this is the first step. It's a small step. It's a historic step towards rebalancing the regressive tax code that we have by asking the wealthy, the very wealthy, the top 1% of Washingtonians to pay a little bit more so that people in the bottom 95th percentile of income earners can pay a little less.
Now, Republican Representative Travis Couture of Allen, again, he is the leading GOP budget writer and for the House, and he's familiar with some of the reports from EOI about their benefits from the coming income tax should it hold up in the courts, or again, if voters choose not to reject it, although they have rejected it at least 9 times in the past when it's come to the ballot. So here's what Representative Couture had to say.
I did read their report and some of the scenarios that they cherry picked to try to make it look as good as it possibly could. And then some just misdirection and disinformation, claiming that you're the average family or whatever their cherry picked family of a single mom and two toddlers or something like that was going to save like $30,000 a year. And if you extrapolate that across like all of the like people in the state of Washington, that would be more than our state budget. And so the math doesn't really math for some of their claims, and part of it is because they're not just talking about what's in the income tax bill, but they're talking about what's not in the income tax bill, like Apple Health for Kids, Medicaid, right? And childcare subsidies. But as we already know, those things already exist. And kids are already qualified for them. And so trying to claim savings from an income tax bill that one didn't even have those policy items attached to it at all, but two already exist is completely disingenuous. That's number one. But at the same time, like Republicans, for example, supported, bolstering the working families tax credit. It's something that the Republican caucus has pushed for years and ignored by the majority party in Olympia until just this year. And as a matter of fact, I funded the working families tax credit not through new taxes in my budget framework that I released before the Democrats and the governor back in December through the Climate Commitment Act, because that is a very grifty, a program that we're paying for, DEI studies in Africa and drum circles, all sorts of stuff for environmental justice. It's not actually doing anything to lessen the carbon impact we have in our society, but it is hammering Washingtonians with the carbon tax on gas, which is the most regressive tax that we have, bar none. So turning that back around into tax credits for working families seemed like a good move to do for us, but I didn't need to raise holy hell with an income tax to fund the working families tax credit. So it's not that we're against the working families tax credit or some of the, mild expansions of it. We're against wrecking our economy and dousing gasoline and becoming an arsonist of our own economy in order to pay for it.
Now, the Economic Opportunity Institute says that families who will get help from the expansion of the working families tax credit will be among the biggest beneficiaries of the income tax once it is implemented, because households that were previously ineligible for the working families tax credit may now be eligible for tax refunds of between $335 a year all the way up to $1,330 a year. And that is according to an FAQ, frequently asked questions from Washington Senate Democrats. Now, the new income tax will, in fact, broaden eligibility for the credit to, they estimate, another 460,000 Washington households. Right now, there are about 350,000 Washington households who take advantage of the working families tax credit. So I'll show you here, according again to the information put up by Senate Democrats, it extends the eligibility to every family earning at or below the state's what they call need standard, which is a monthly income threshold based on family size that is considered reasonable for a family to pay their bills and other expenses. And they say, for example, a family of four with an income up to $9,579 a month, not a bad income, or an individual with an income tax up to $3,816 would be eligible for the expanded working families tax credit under the income tax. Now, Representative Couture, in our interview, he pointed out that Republicans also offered an expansion of the working families tax credit, but without any new taxes. His proposal was to fund the expansion of this tax credit by using some of the Climate Commitment Act revenues, the CCA revenues. He calls it a grifty program that we're all paying for. In some cases, they've shown that some of the money is being used for diversity, equity, inclusion studies. Some money has gone to what he called drum circles, all sorts of stuff for environmental justice, as opposed to programs that really do prove there is a benefit to the environment, because that's what all the CCA funds were sold as going to provide for all of us. Um, so he says, why not use the CCA money to benefit working families and give them a tax credit there, since it's the working families who are paying so much more in gas taxes at the pump because of the CCA. He presses that Washingtonians, I should say, are still reeling, remember, from last year's record tax increases.
Can we just not forget for a second that literally last year we passed the largest tax increases in state history? All of them regressive. B&O, sales, you name it. Fees, Discover Pass fees. We taxed the joy right out of the state of Washington. And this is kind of, to me, it's like the Democrats have they're they've robbed us blind, and then they give us like $1 back and ask us to be grateful for it. I mean, it's nuts. I mean, whatever tax relief, even in the best case scenario of what is in this income tax, doesn't even pales in comparison to the $13 billion plus that they just raised on us the year before. And so I just think it's crazy. I think that if economics was water and Democrats were in a boat, they couldn't fall out of the boat and find it. I mean, it's just nuts. We're torching our economy right now, and it is like a five-alarm fire.
So obviously, anyone impacted on either side of the fight over the income tax is invested in this. I remind you, we have Brian Haywood and Let's Go Washington, who have an April 30th date with the state Supreme Court to have arguments as they're trying to get the referendum and their push for the Secretary of State to allow them to proceed with the referendum, which right now they are precluded from doing because the bill had an emergency clause attached, which basically made it referendum proof. So they're fighting that on April 30th. In addition, Let's Go Washington is also working on a couple of initiatives, likely one that goes directly to the legislature and one that goes directly to voters, probably for the ballot later this year if they're able to pull that off and get enough signatures. So there are a lot of different avenues moving forward, as well as the legal challenge that I mentioned as we opened here today in Klickitat County Superior Court. So that brings us to our next issue for today's episode of Washington in Focus. Today, I met with one of the plaintiffs, met in person with Kurt Nuccitelli, who is worried that Washington's new income tax is going to make it even harder for him to stay in business. He owns Spirit Transport Systems Incorporated out of the Kent Valley. He's got 14 employees, and he's been in business now for more than 20 years. They move goods from the ports of Seattle and Tacoma, and it's an industry where competition is pretty intense, and raising prices isn't always an option. And sometimes you're also locked into contracts with some of the folks that you work with, some of your shippers, for fuel. And remember what's happening with the prices of diesel here in the state of Washington. I didn't check the prices today with AAA Washington, but last I checked, it was close to $7 an hour, or $7 an hour, $7 per gallon for the price of diesel. For truckers, independent truckers, that's a huge hit. So he toured me around some of his property and shared with me that he's coming off a couple of really lean years.
But the reality is, the fact that you see all them sitting here means that we're not that busy, because they should be underneath containers sitting at warehouses somewhere. So this is another lean year after the last two that we've had. So
Yeah.
so this income tax comes into play where I won't be able to carry these losses forward. That's a huge hit for us.
Now, back in the office, Mr. Nuccitelli told me that because his company's profits are taxed on personal income, a tax increase on him, the income tax, could impact his business directly depending on the year. And that can mean he doesn't make as much money to bring home for himself. He can't give his employees raises. He refers to them all as family. He says, when you've got a small company like that, we're all family. I want to take care of these people. I want to keep my good people. And maybe I can't give them a raise. I can't give them improved benefits that I want to. He shared also that he recently had to pay $100,000 to repair a sewer pipe in his facility's parking lot. Didn't think he should have to pay that to the city or county, but he was forced to do that. And something like that is a huge hit to a small business. So I asked him specifically why he decided to get involved as a plaintiff in the legal challenge to the income tax, knowing this is going to be a very long and very public fight.
Well, when I heard about it and understood that one, it was against the Washington State Constitution, that was the primary reason that kind of piqued my interest in understanding what was going on. And then also the narrative out there, just calling it a millionaire's tax for me, again, just kind of painting a narrative, kind of pulling on heartstrings. And I was that guy a decade or so ago where I would have just jumped on board and said, yes, let's make sure, the rich are paying their fair share. But the reality is, this would impact small businesses like myself. This would impact my family, my ability to take care of my employees, to have proper compensation, good benefit packages. So this is uh, really hurts the small business, who we should be supporting. And then there's lean years and there's fat years. And so the fat years, it's going to really, impact our cash. And then the other tenet of the bill is that you can't carry loss years forward. So therefore, on the years that are lean, I wouldn't be able to carry that forward into some future prosperous years. So, and that's a huge deal as well.
He explained to me also that taxes on his business are making it increasingly difficult to be profitable, even without a pending income tax. He talked about property taxes. He's got a big warehouse and office space, and then a big back lot for a bunch of his equipment. Of course, business and occupation taxes that have gone up, taxes with the city of Kent, because he goes in and out of the ports of Seattle and Tacoma. There's a tax base there that's owed. And of course, his drivers as well. And those costs have been going up with increasing fuel prices. So he said it is admittedly a struggle.
Washington State is not a very business friendly environment. So, and I've heard, mixed messages that we're not in the top worst states of the country, but the reality is, the taxes that we pay, B&O taxes, Department of Revenue taxes, payroll taxes, property taxes, personal property taxes. There's a huge, probably close to 50 cents on every dollar that goes to taxes already. So this would be a huge, huge hit for us to be able to remain uh, prosperous and competitive. And it really puts us at a disadvantage. And actually, I think it really favors some of these big corporations, because if small businesses keep getting shut down because we can't afford it, then that means the market share is going to go to these bigger companies. So it just makes it very, very difficult to do business and run a good business that takes care of its people. For me, I don't need my employees struggling to make ends meet. They should be able to make a livable wage working for me, full-time job, where they don't have to be have that added stress of not being able to pay their bills. So for me to have the ability for me to be able to increase their salaries, to have a more robust benefit package and other perks that come along with working for Spirit Transport, that's one of the main foundations that I opened this company on, was to treat my people well.
Now, the lawsuit filed by Citizen Action Defense Fund includes two other couples who are plaintiffs in the case. There's farmers and business groups, including the NFIB, the Building Industry Association of Washington. And the case basically argues that this policy is in direct violation of the Washington state constitution. The tax is scheduled to take effect, I remind you, in 2028, so we're still a couple of years out, though the future depends on the outcome, of course, of the legal challenge, which has been filed in Klickitat County Superior Court. So that is it for today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily. As always, I Thank you for watching. I appreciate it. Also appreciate and read your comments. Check out our Center Square Washington page for more stories like this. We'll see you, I hope, on Friday.